All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Mike Heisey. I am the Programming and Events Chair for Social Enterprise Chicago, also known as SoCenti. So we have a lot to celebrate. First day of March Madness, St. Patrick's Day tomorrow, and Social Enterprise. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks for Roosevelt for offering the space and the alumni discount. We appreciate it. This is my alma mater. I spent many late nights in this room studying many years ago. So good to be back, and thank you to Roosevelt for hosting us. Thank you to DePaul University for sponsoring us. I hope everyone gets a pen on your way in or out. Thanks to Maya, wherever she is. Yeah, thank you, Maya. And thank you all for joining us. So one question I want to ask as we continue to expand and do these events is, how did you hear about us? So just a raise of a hand, who heard about us from one of their friends, from word of mouth? Okay. Who came because we sent you an email from our email list? Okay, couple. Who heard about this event through social media, whether that be LinkedIn or Facebook? More hands. Did anyone actually come here because they read one of our Facebook ads? Okay, a couple. Makes it worth it, makes it worth it. We'll look at how much we spend on that next time, but all right, at least we got a couple. So I'm not going to be up here that long. I just wanted to welcome everyone, introduce myself, and thank you so much for coming. There are definitely ways to get involved in what we do. You know, Social Enterprise Chicago is meant to be the convener and the catalyst for people looking to do mission-driven ventures, right? So building a business with an earned revenue strategy so you can make money and make social impact. And we support the industry or the scene in a lot of ways. There's a social enterprise certificate program that Marc and some others help facilitate at UIC. We're always open to mentoring social enterprises, right? That are trying to scale, that are trying to make an impact, that are looking for resources. We hold events like these, and this is our second one. And the positive feedback from the last one was just overwhelming, because connecting the dots, right? Social impact investors to social entrepreneurs to nonprofit leaders that are looking for different ways to engage in these ever-changing times. So there's so much value that we could bring, and we'd love to get to know each and every one of you and connect you to whoever we can, and continue to come to our events, get involved, whether applying for our board or even volunteering. So if you haven't been to our website, please check it out. We'll send a follow-up email, and you can find more information there. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers tonight, Marc and Mike.
Thank you. Marc, before you start, I feel like I'm set a square. It's like a splash zone here. Leaving the first row empty. I don't know what's
Well, I don't know. This.
All right, it says reserve the phone. Like I'm gonna kind of as the guest of the guest, I'm gonna take a moment of personal privilege and ask people to come on up. It'll be safe, I promise. It's not.
It's like a college class where everybody's afraid of the professor and they all sit back until they're invited or forced up.
Yes.
So thank you, Mike. That was a good call.
Yeah. Don't mind me.
You're upstaging us. We can't help but be. Okay,
There's a little bit of glare, so we're gonna pull the sheets down a little bit.
please. Well, let me add my welcome and thanks to those who are here in person, as well as those who are participating virtually. And Mike, are we on at this moment for our virtual audience? Okay, we are. Good. Well, thanks again for being here. And Mike, thanks to you for joining us. It's a real treat to be with you. And I know you have a lot of interesting things to say. If I just probe to get the right answers out of you. So if it is interesting, it's on you. And if it isn't, it's my fault. So thanks. You're the best. So I think it was Mark Twain who said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I want to kind of throw out a couple of rhymes for your consideration.
Okay.
So if we go back to the 1930s, the Great Depression, shortly after President Roosevelt took office, there was a run on the banks. And banks were failing, people were afraid. They took their money out, and the metaphor is they put their money under their mattress. Some of that literally was true. And then, literally 90 years ago this week, President Roosevelt had his first fireside chat. And then as now, there actually was no fireplace. It too was a metaphor, where he was sitting around a fire. Of course, this was all radio, no TV. And he was trying to calm down the populace. He was scared to death. And they had, so the first rhyme is, we're here with our own fireside chats. But his fireside chats was in a context where some 30% of the population was unemployed. And that's the other rhyme. We have serious problems associated with poverty and the many faces of poverty. We're looking at homelessness, we're looking at food insecurity, housing insecurity, the racial, economic gap, both in terms of wealth and income. So one of the things we're going to do today with Mike's generous participation is explore ways to reach those people, improve their lives, those who are living on the outskirts of hope, and how we might employ market-based strategies to drive positive social change. So this is analogous to what President Roosevelt sought to do. And of course, he employed the federal government to take a bank holiday, to close the banks, so as to allow them to catch their breath rather than having lines around the block of people seeking to withdraw whatever funds they had. And here we're going to be instead agents of change in the private sector, but in concert with governments, the nonprofit community, the foundation community, impact investors, traditional businesses, traditional investors. And that's what the social enterprise community is all about. So that's kind of how I'm framing tonight's conversation, looking historically at what was, but looking today at what is and how we all can make a difference. So Mike, I'm going to start with your permission, looking at the trajectory of your extraordinary career. And well, you'll see. Hold your judgment on whether
It could be bad or good. So
let's see. We'll just see if the thanks are warranted. So the way I see it, there have been two through lines within much or most of what you've done professionally. And the two through lines are these. One, obvious to everybody here, you've had a very close relationship with President and Mrs. Obama. And that started at a very early stage in your life. We're going to talk about that. And the other has to do with your role in engaging stakeholders, identifying value propositions for people, institutions, organizations who are necessary or desirable to achieve the objectives that you're seeking to accomplish. I see both of those. So let's kind of review the bidding on that. Before you were a lawyer, you were a paralegal at Sidley. And I understand you had a young female mentor whose name I think was Michelle Robinson.
Correct.
She later changed her name, I'm told. And later you served as chief counsel and then Senator Obama's Senate staff. And you were close aide to the president throughout his first term, first as director of public liaison and intergovernmental affairs on the presidential transition team, then as counselor for strategic engagement, deputy assistant to the president in the Office of Public Engagements, and intergovernmental affairs, and chief of staff to one Valerie Jarrett, who I understand now is the chief executive officer of the Obama Foundation. Perhaps not all coincidental. So setting the stage in that fashion, what I'd invite you to do is first test my facts and see if I got it right.
Yeah.
But if I generally have it right, I'd love to hear your version of the origin story.
Okay.
How you and each of the Obamas first connected, and how that connection has grown into a lifelong friendship with each of them, and what that means to you.
All right, I will try to live up to that introduction. And Mark, I think, I just want to start by thanking you for your service to the city. The way you framed the conversation is testament to the work you've done, why you've done it, and how you've done it. And I think one of the more exciting things about the work that I do today is I have the opportunity to really build upon and leverage the tremendous service of yourself and people like you. So
You're very
it's
kind,
really
but you're very kind. Thank you. But this is about you tonight,
right.
my friends.
I will do that.
When we change seats,
Okay.
maybe one day.
I will do that.
Thank you.
There's a little bit of puffery in the story about how I met the Obamas, and I know it because I was the one who puffed it.
Well, this is your opportunity to clear the
I gotta
record.
set the record straight.
Please, let's go.
I was not a paralegal
Oh,
at the law firm Civic. I was really a project assistant.
oh,
And I was a project assistant that got a summer job for 2 months. And the way that happened is I grew up in Chicago. I was born on the south side of Chicago. My mother remarried, fell in love with an immigrant with a really long last name who ended up adopting me, and we moved to the neighborhood of Uptown. And I spent most of my childhood kind of moving back and forth between these two sides of town. And when you do that, you pass downtown a lot. And to me, downtown Chicago represented everything that I wanted to be. The gleaming buildings, skyscrapers. And I decided, with the strong encouragement of my girlfriend, who's my wife of 30 years, who's my wife Timona, who's here with us now.
who doesn't look old enough to have been married for 30 years or even to be 30 years old.
I agree with that. I ended up deciding to follow a passion to go to law school. And so I was entering into, I was working as a bike messenger during the summers that I was here in college, primarily to make enough money to be able to take my girlfriend out on dates. And it was not a very lofty thing. And that job was one where you make a lot of money if you hustle. And I started to find out, because I was a talkative sort, that there were these large law firms in the city. I got a job, an assignment as a messenger in one of those law firms. And then ended up, getting the attention as I worked really hard of the person who's running human resources at this law firm, Silly Austin. And I found out that you could be a summer associate. Summer associate was a job summer job for law students. And I learned that summer associates were paid the same rate as first-year lawyers, which at the time was $68,000 a year. I did not think you could spend $68,000 a year. I just wouldn't know what you would do with it. It was more money than I ever imagined making, and to be able to make that rate as a summer, so as you could tell, I'm doing a bunch of lofty stuff now. But at the time, I was pretty focused on my girlfriend and making as much money as I possibly could.
Noble priorities in their own right.
Exactly right. Driven.
Yeah.
So I got this woman's number. And I called her and said I wanted a job in the summer. I was informed that you could get a job as a summer associate after you were a law student. I hadn't even gotten a law student. I called her every month for 13 months to see if I could get a job. In the 13th month, it was the next summer, I left a voicemail saying I had now gotten into law school. And I got a call back saying I was working at selling clothes on Michigan Avenue Structure. You remember that place? And I was told that I had an opportunity. She was going to give me a job as a project assistant for 2 months. And I was in. So I took my one ill-fitting suit and took myself into the First National Plaza building, I think it was called at the time. Those elevators that had the leather, kind of faux leather thing on them, and went to work every day. And there were not that many young lawyers there. Not any that I thought paid me any attention. I was so hungry and thirsty to try to learn as much as I could at the time. And it was Michelle Robinson, who now the world knows is an incredibly generous spirit and someone who really sees people. She saw me, and she saw something in me that I didn't quite see in myself. Over the years, and I'll end with this, I had always thought, and the way I always had imagined the story is that I had kind of sought her out. You know, I guess so many of us are heroes of our own stories. I was the protagonist here. I wanted to, and it wasn't until we had kind of talked about our relationship in front of another set of young leaders that I realized that in her perspective, she was the one who saw me. And it was just a remarkable moment to think about the kind of person that was and the kind of person I hope to be, where, you know, she sort of saw me. She did nothing more than invite me into her office, show me what she was working on at her desk, and spend that time investing. And you know, she hasn't gotten rid of me since. We built a relationship as mentor and mentee. And in many ways, it was very much about who she and her fiance at the time, and later her husband, who they wanted to be and what they wanted to do in the city. They wanted to be great professionals. They wanted to give back to their community. They got married the same year that Damona and I got married. They were very much mentors on this journey and role models. And, you know, over time, I started getting involved and interested in politics. President Obama started getting involved and interested in politics. And so our relationship deepened from there, but that's how we met.
And thereafter?
Well, thereafter, I would just say this. I went to a picnic cookout and I'd heard about this guy. He was not working there at the law firm that summer. It was president of the Harvard Law Review. You know, like everybody was hoping he might come back to work at the law firm. And, you know, as you can imagine, Barack Obama, I had an image in mind of who he was. I met him. So I'm at a cookout, you know, Michelle had invited me, and I'm playing basketball, and there's this guy who keeps like going to his left and scoring. And you know, I'm like, I can guard this dude. You got to just play him to his left. Like, what's going on? So I talk a little smack. Like, I'm gonna take this guy. And you know, he hit a couple of jumpers on me. And afterwards, he introduced himself. He's like, "Oh, I'm Moroccan." Smart, you know, brilliant, you know, and you know, can play basketball. So our relationship built up from there. But afterwards, I did ended up practicing law. As you heard, I ended up moving to Washington D.C. to work in the Clinton administration, and was there. as both President Obama and Michelle Obama begin to think more deeply about their opportunity to serve and give back.
Well, thank you for that. All interesting. How much of that do you think is just luck?
I think that, well, first of all, I would just say I'm a man of faith. And, you know, I believe that we're here for a reason.
Yeah.
And
a purpose.
And a purpose. And I try to live into that purpose. I try to be clear about what my role in it is and what it's not. What I do, where it begins, and I have limits. And that I'm in a world and that is larger and bigger than myself. So what I'd say is that I think that there were circumstances that allowed me to find my purpose. And I think that I found it through trial, failure, and learning from that failure to find an opportunity where I could take what I know and who I am and try to give back and try to succeed and try to raise a family, be the best person that I can be. And so, you know, I think that I don't know if history rhymes, but I do know that history is written by the winners, and that there's a way to tell my story that makes it all seem like a very straight line. You know, there's this kid who did this, that, and found this person, and then he ends up right here sitting on the chair with you. And I think that what ends up happening is much more kinetic than that. I think that's much more interesting. And I think it also means that there are other people who are living steps away from us, blocks away from us, miles away from us, who have the same talent, the same drive, the same gifts, maybe more talent, more drive, and more gifts, who need the same opportunities that I have.
We will absolutely get into that.
Okay.
And thank you for saying that. And you're right, it's never a straight line. And there's also a little serendipity in there from time to time.
Serendipity was the word I was looking for. See, this is why we're doing this. That is, oh my God. Yes, serendipity is the word. That's exactly right.
Okay, so you learned some stuff in the White House, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And you took some of those lessons when you left the White House to join the Walt Disney Company.
That is true.
And you served as vice president of corporate citizenship. So I want to ask you a question about corporate social responsibility, because I think that all fits into the same ecosystem. So I'll give you my opinion first, and then I'll ask you to agree with me or disagree with me,
All right.
or educate me or correct me. So I think that things are changing in public companies' mindset. As we're now hopefully leaving the age of COVID, as we have seen the start of a racial reckoning, as increasingly people are starting to buy into the idea that climate change is real and an existential threat, corporate social responsibility is starting to take on a new meaning, and savvy businesses are beginning to see social impact as a new form of currency. And I can give you some examples of how I see that in my own life and in my own practice, but I'm curious as to your view about, you know, it used to be businesses that held themselves out as socially responsible, wrote a check to a charity, good, sponsored a parade, good, but it wasn't about their culture. It wasn't about their DEI. It wasn't about where from the top down there is an interest really in driving social change and collaborating with nonprofits and social enterprises, or sourcing goods and services from enterprising nonprofits or for-profit social purpose businesses. But I want to get your take on that. And having been in that space then, and if you agree, has there been an evolution in that thinking? And I would argue an improvement in really the role business can take and is starting to take. Obviously, it's imperfect and there's a long way still to go, but I wanted to get your insight on that.
My experience has been, and look, I was in the practice of law in the mid-90s. And part of the reason that I ended up, I think, getting those opportunities was because there was a push from community-based leaders, from people in the legal profession, and I think most importantly, and I think this is still a factor, from their clients, to diversify their ranks and create more opportunity. And so then there was a Michelle Robinson, who then is trying to figure out who else can have these opportunities, because these can be very lonely roads. And I think that, what I've seen, what I saw at the Walt Disney Company, what I've seen elsewhere, and I've seen this in politics, is that the impetus and the drive comes from the consumer, the customer, the client, and the constituent. These entities are in business to make money. And if people are confused by that, they will learn quickly what the purpose of these enterprises. And so there are ways that activists can hold and make these companies uncomfortable. And the reason why change will happen is because the enterprise will think, if I don't change, people will think that this is a bad enterprise and they won't buy my stuff, or I'll lose clients, or I'll lose business. And my wife is in the middle of seeing this in the real estate industry in this city. Companies are now demanding a different kind of team.
Yeah.
They're demanding a different kind of sensibility because they want that reflected in the work, because they're getting pressure from their employees and from their consumers. And I think what I saw at the Walt Disney Company, what I've seen elsewhere recently, is this reckoning took place, and all the statements were made in 2020 about race, is that companies, I think, felt pressure to make political statements. And political statements, in many ways, when you don't have political accountability associated, are kind of pretty easy to make, right? You're not going to get voted out of office. You're not going to have to figure out and be held accountable for how you spend taxpayer money. But what ends up happening is you also end up putting yourself in a position where you can get asked and criticized and pushed to make other political statements. We see that happening in Florida right now with companies. I'm much more interested in, and a friend of mine, Anand, wrote a book in which he noted that we were taking our government and our system, where we make decisions about where resources go, and we were using language from the business community, and using a criteria for success and failure from the business community. And what was happening was that we were essentially taking responsibility away from government, taxpayers, and our democracy in order to create accountability. And so I say all that to say that I'm really much more interested in how you do business in our communities and where you use your business practices in your wealth than in what kind of statement you have on your website. I'm much more interested in what your employees' experiences are and how they're able to thrive in your company than, what check you wrote. Because I think that what I think is if philanthropy, and I love philanthropy, I'm involved in philanthropy, I think it's really important. But philanthropy is the money that is not going to impact your bottom line, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, it's not philanthropy, it's investment. And so if you are a company and a business that is using your bottom line to make an impact, I'm interested in that. And I have found that one of the more effective ways to get a company to use its bottom line to make an impact is if they recognize that that is the only way they're going to be a successful enterprise. And that's the dialogue I think we need to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, you can't be Pollyannish about this stuff. I think businesses are making self-interested decisions, but those self-interested decisions increasingly lead to societal improvement. So
Yes.
for example, today, young people don't want to go to work for a company that doesn't demonstrate the values that they see as important to them. Middle management of companies want to be mentors. They want to have that gratification. They want to get involved in stuff. So, I mean, out of their own self-interest, and obviously it does lead to profitability, because if you can't recruit and retain the talent you need, you're not going to succeed, or certainly not going to succeed at the level you otherwise would. So, and I think all of those kinds of decisions look through the lens of what is in the company's best interest to be successful from a profit perspective, and also to be accountable to all of their stakeholders, shareholders, employees, the communities in which they operate, the supply chains in which they engage, and so on. So I think that, but it seems to me there's a greater awareness, sensitivity, perhaps sophistication about how those decisions are made. And they're not just decisions about dollars and cents without contextualizing them in terms of who's going to care about this and how does it affect what I'm doing as a business. So at least that's my take on that. And I think that's compatible with what you're saying.
I agree with it. And I would add another factor, which is I think there's a level of transparency
Yeah.
that exists
Yeah, for sure.
today, and a very swift accountability mechanism that happens. And look, I think it's making everyone uncomfortable. The level of transparency, the level of accountability, the level of change, where I'm at the stage now where I'm in my office when I go to my office. We get the opportunity to recruit some of the most talented young people around. It's a great privilege of working with the Obama Foundation, but it also means I have a 28-year-old that I know doesn't have the level of experience that I think would warrant them to come in my office and explain to us why we need to do a particular strategy in a different way. And that's making me uncomfortable. Right.
Yeah.
It's not the way I want to, that's not the way I'm used to. As you've heard me tell stories about, I was afraid to make eye contact with Michelle Robinson because she was a big shot and I was a kid and didn't know anything.
Yeah.
I think but what I'm starting to, recognize, and I see this amongst my peers and other leaders, is that the young people that are in our workplaces, in our world, and in our community have an idealism that is based on their unwillingness to accept the status quo. And I think, and if I'm in the business of defending the status quo, it's time for me to retire, right? It's time for me to shut up.
Well, to me, the biggest compliment you can give somebody is to call them a disruptor.
And they're disrupting.
Yeah.
And I think so I think the level of, and this is what I see happening in the area of corporate social responsibility, is that, from accountability mechanisms and criticism and critique, these walls that used to be in place that would keep someone in the business community kind of insulated from what's happening in their own community, and the walls that would keep the people who are in the community insulated from what's happening at an office in a fancy big shot philanthropy. Those walls are all breaking down. And the people I think that I see who are struggling the most are the ones who are trying to find a way to rebuild them and shore them up. And I think the people who I see really winning and innovating in that area are the people who are sort of accepting the world that they're in and trying to innovate a new way to be able to be successful in it.
Exactly right.
It's uncomfortable, and I like to celebrate those who are succeeding, but I would just say, I've come to believe that if things are quiet and safe and feel, like no one's changing anything, it's because you're in a bubble and you have no idea what's going on in the real world, and it's gonna smack you in the face super soon. So I get it. If I hear quiet around me, I'm like, who are we not talking to?
Right.
Because we're missing something big right now.
Exactly. Well, you left Disney
I didn't leave this.
and you're now,
To the heartbreak of my daughter, I would just say, it's hard to, where do you go to still impress your daughter when you leave the White House?
I suppose the answer to that would be the Obama Foundation.
Well, that's right. I was super impressed, my daughter, not so much.
Well, all of us are super impressed. So that's okay. So you're now vice president of civic engagement. And that means that you lead the outreach efforts and civic engagement for the foundation. And I understand now you've taken on technology as well, because you had a lot of spare time. So I'm interested in decision-making. And I know that you embrace President Obama's unique approach to driving social change and civic change by bringing people together the way a community organizer might, because he indeed was a community organizer. And I think once that's in your blood, you're probably always a community organizer. So I'm interested to learn how your experiences within the administration and later at Disney inform what you do today, and specifically how President Obama's approach to driving change informs how you make decisions today.
A couple of things. I think the first thing I would say is that President Obama had a phrase, and this is something that our CEO Valerie Jarrett has shared before, but it's real, which is he explained to us once that part of the job of the leader was to absorb pain. And the reason why I say that is because I have found that once you are at the level of authority and power and influence that he's at, and then obviously was a member of that administration. I'm an executive at the Obama Foundation. You become a representative of power. And so when I started my work at the Obama Foundation, came here to Chicago, back home, to work on the South Side, started organizing, which meant that I would go out and find people to talk to and listen to them. And they would come to me and they would say, what's your agenda? They literally, Chicago is the South Side, right? That's how we talk. What's your agenda? And I would tell them that President Obama was still in the White House. We were just starting to think about what the foundation was. So my agenda was to come here and listen to you. I know you've heard we're bringing this here. We're just starting to make our plans. Can you talk to me about what it is you do? And they would ask me a couple more questions to probe whether or not what my real agenda was. And once they found I didn't have one, they started talking and telling me what I should know, what I should do, what was wrong with what President Obama had done in the White House, or what was wrong with the University of Chicago. I'd spent a lot of time explaining to people that the University of Chicago and the Obama Foundation were two separate entities. And it was because I was dealing with people who had been at the wrong end of power for their lives of their family, their parents, and their parents' parents. And these were people who were willing to participate in the work of improving their community. They were angry. They were upset. And if I had walked into that setting and explained to them, and I was talking to my brother, Rami Nashashibi, just this morning about this issue. If I had decided that I needed to spend my time telling them why they shouldn't be mad at me, right? Hey, I've been at Disney for like the last few years, and you know, I was born down the street, and you know, I love my kids, and I'm a really good guy. It would mean that I wasn't listening to them.
Right.
Right? That's the lesson they would learn from me. Oh, this person is more worried about himself than he is about me. And by the way, he has access to the president of the United States, and I don't. So why is he spending his time thinking that he needs to be the one who's, you know, the victim here in this conversation or vulnerable in this conversation? And so the first thing I'd say is that part of what a role of a leader is to absorb pain if you want to build an authentic relationship. I think the second thing I'd say is you have to know, as you build your agenda, you have to know what your role is and what your role is not. And I'm telling you, our society will truly have you think, if you work at a Fortune 50 company, or you work for the president of the United States, or you have whatever position they're going to give you to have, that not only can you do everything, that you should do it. And so, you know, part of the opportunity to think about things as an organizer is to figure out what everybody's role is. My role is not to build affordable housing, right? That's not something we decided to do. That's not something we can do. There are institutions, developers, government, et cetera, that creates affordable housing, that creates the rules and regulations and protections for affordable housing. And so what we decided to do, and it was really important to me, was I was never going to make an empty promise. I was never going to tell, and I'm telling you, our culture creates this incentive for the powerful people to be able to solve everything. And what that does is it disempowers citizens. It tells them that they don't have a role in it, that the best they can do is try to find a way to extract something out of this powerful interest. And what we talked about when we first sat down is how much companies and governments shift and move based on what communities actually want. So they're actually, communities and people actually have a tremendous amount of power in our society. And so I think, you know, trying to make sure that I was in a position to tell people, hey, we're gonna have a conversation about our role in this community. And I'm gonna use my power and my privilege to make sure that you have a seat at this table with these other interests and entities that will come because I asked them to come here and may not come because you asked them to come here. And also, by the way, you're not gonna have every seat. You're not gonna represent this community because I know that there are people who live right next to you who disagree with you because they have different interests. We have renters, we have homeowners, we have current business leaders. We have people who have great business ideas, who want to have entrepreneurs, who want to be entrepreneurs. We have faith leaders. We have people of different faiths. We have people who decide they have no faith. We have to be able to set up a commons in which everyone has an opportunity to participate if we're going to do what we say we are going to do, which is come in and do good in this community that has not seen the level of investment that we're making in generations. And so it was that sort of community organizer mindset that allowed me to understand that this was going to be messy. I was going to make mistakes. I needed to not overpromise. I needed to deliver on every promise that I actually made. And I needed to absorb some pain. And through all of that, the other thing I'd say that President Obama has taught me is I need to take care of myself. You know, I need to make sure that I was being a good husband. you know, he make sure I was like getting sleep. As he always said to me when I was working for him, I didn't make sure I was eating salad every now and again. and make sure that I didn't have slip into the arrogance that meant that it was kind of on me to, you know, transform the South Side of Chicago. No one person can do that, but collectively, with hard work, we've seen more extraordinary things. We can see this happen too.
Yes.
Yes.
So one of the ways you're bringing people together is through the power of mentorship. You've already talked about how Ms. Robinson in the old days mentored you and how important that has been to your career path and your personal path as well. So I want to talk a little bit about My Brother's Keeper,
Okay.
which recognizes how elusive the American dream is for so many boys and young men of color, and how there are persistent opportunity gaps that President Obama, I guess in 2014, saw as a way to create a path for these young men to be supported and encouraged to think more broadly about what their future might mean for them, and how appropriate mentorships might be introduced at critical life-changing moments. And now, of course, that's under the umbrella of the foundation as the MBK Alliance, and you're impacting communities in major cities around the country with the MBK Alliance, Chicago being one of the largest setters of influence about how you keep young people on the right track. So I'd love to hear your version of what My Brother's Keeper's underlying theory of social change is. And as kind of a follow-up question, what has its social impact been? Are there empirical data you can point to? Are there, how can you measure the success of the program as it traces back to what's behind it? What's the rationale? What's the social case for it?
Well, you're making me nervous because you sound like one of my check-in leaders, President Obama.
I don't know if there's a greater, I don't know if there's a greater
There you
compliment.
go. Happened a lot. I will promise you, it happened a lot, and I still get nervous.
But I'm not nearly as good a basketball
after
player.
Okay.
Okay.
after I've been meeting with President Obama, I'm always like, can we like take the rest of the day off? Is there anything else that needs to be done around here? Don't nobody please don't tell. So the My Brother's Keeper Alliance was created out of a look at the data. President Obama asked the federal government to take a look at their youth data and success metrics, and do something that hadn't been done before the federal government, which is deaggregated by race and gender. And what we found at the time was, and I can get into the details of this, but broadly speaking, boys and young men of color were at the bottom of every good statistic and at the top of every bad statistic. And that then compelled action. Once you see that, you have to act. And so there was an analysis that was done and that picked up on points of intervention where you can shift the outcomes in the life of a young person. And these young men were very much canaries in the coal mine, because these, as I describe these points of intervention, you will note that they are not unique to boys and young men of color. But what we found was when there was an intervention made that was successful, it helped all the young people. So first one is pretty simple. We want these young people entering school prepared to learn. You know, everything that we know about the word gap in early childhood education, childcare, and what happens, we know that has an enormous impact on the life of a young person. The next milestone we know is that they're reading at third grade level in third grade, because the data has shown, and you can see it if you go into, and I once I saw this, I couldn't unsee it, which was you would walk into a school at around fourth grade, and you were in that school and seeing those kids in third grade, you could see the ones who realized that the system had given up on them. You could see the ones who knew, and it's second and third grade, you can see their light is in their eyes. I go and read to these young people sometimes over the holidays. I wear my long Santa hat. It's a lot of fun. If you are, by the time you're in fourth grade or beyond, if you're not reading at grade level, you start to realize that you're not going to catch up. Kids are not dumb. They know that the system is not working for them. And if you're there reading at third grade level, you can tell that you can lock in for the rest of it. So we have to have these kids reading third grade level, third grade. And it goes on from there. We want them prepared for success in high school. We want them ready for college and career moving forward. And so that's the theory of change around boys and through My Brother's Keeper. We also believe that there is an opportunity to take a collective action approach, where you can decide, for example, that you want young people to read at third grade level in third grade. And you can bring around, it's actually not that large of a group, the different entities and organizations and institutions that are involved in the life of a young person, and decide collectively, we're going to tackle this. You know, there's a high school district in Yonkers, New York, that moved their graduation rate from some 50-some% of boys and young men of color to 90%, 90+% in a matter of years, all because through the My Brother's Keeper program, all the institutions involved in that decided that they were going to tackle it. So they made decisions around creating more purpose for young people, giving them mentors, et cetera. And I think the last thing I'd say is, it really came to life for us, and I happened to be in the room when it happened. Isn't that Hamilton song? Yeah, it's one of my favorite. I love that. That's that dance hall vibe too, right? Anyway, we'll move on. There was a program that I think people are familiar with called Becoming Man. Now, I love the program. I think it ended up being having a lot of weight on its shoulders. It's doing great work. President Obama and myself he was in the circle of young people that were talking Becoming a Man in Hyde Park High School. This was when I was still working at the White House. And the dialogue around young people at the time was essentially cognitive behavioral therapy. People know that phrase. But it was giving these young people tools to have a moment between stimulus and response. And if you think about, because I moved out of some of these communities, but I know people who grew up in these communities. It is foolish and dangerous to have a moment of interruption between stimulus and response, right? That's how you become a victim in our neighborhoods. And so the very thing that we're teaching our children, which is when something happens to you, to take a moment, decide who you are, what you want to accomplish in life, and make a choice, an intentional choice, and respond. That's something that our children, everybody that's looking at me right now, that's something that we learn, and that's something that our children learn. And if you want to know, everybody's talking about what's happening in our neighborhood, what's happening in our community right now. It's because we have deprived these children of a community in which they have the ability to take a beat between stimulus and response. And the Becoming a Man program gives the intervention and the tools that these young people have. Every young person needs to know that. Every young person has to have that if they're going to be successful in any of the jobs that you all do or I do today, right? If they're going to be able to be successful in an interview, if they're going to be successful. What kind of stimulus did you get in your job today? Just think about the last 8 hours and how you chose to react to that and how you were able to chart your course in life because you have that ability, you have that skill set. Giving that opportunity to our boys and young men of color is what My Brother's Keeper Alliance is all about. And that is something that is not just needed for those who identify as boys and young men, it's needed for all our young.
Thank you for that.
I get excited.
You should. I do too. Then there's the Obama Foundation Leaders USA program, which is for emerging leaders, 24 to 45 years of age. And the idea is really to help them make lasting positive change in their respective communities around the country and a systems level. So how is that program working and what are your hopes for it?
So President Obama described it this way. When he left the White House, he thought about all the things that he could do with his post-presidency. And he decided to pour his energy into creating a presidential center here in the city that gave him so much in the community, where he had the first opportunity to lead in that, where his wife grew up and was raised. And he wanted to go around the world, helping create, inspire a new generation of leaders. And so you want to know what the Obama Foundation does every day? Those are the two things we're doing. We're building the presidential center and we're helping create a new generation of leaders. And right now, the Leaders USA program is the US version of a program that has happened and been taking place for the last 5 to 6 years. We have Leaders Africa, Leaders Europe, and Leaders Asia. And what we're doing there is we're looking to inspire leaders to take a values-based approach to leadership. You know, skills like knowing yourself in your own story, being able to work and talk across difference, understanding that there's an opportunity to operate in a social context. Everything you do all the time, Marc, through your social enterprise work. And it is really building that value-based skill set that we have already seen be transformative. I'll just give you one example. We have a program at the University of Chicago. It's the University of Chicago Obama Foundation Scholars Initiative, where we are working with students in the business school, in the policy school, and elsewhere, and helping bring this values-based leadership to them. And we have interchange within our core network. We had somebody who is in that program who's a violence interrupter, the leader of one of the violence interrupter organizations in our city. And we had someone who was in a country in Eastern Africa, who was a leader who was there, who was trying to figure out how to engage and deal with violence in their community, and had not known about the violence, not only the concept of violence interruption, but also how you can employ that in a way that is valuable. And done in a way to try to involve a community. And so they were able to take that work back to their country and employ it. And so I think we have the opportunity through this work to really bring the world to Chicago and bring Chicago to the world. That's one of the promises of the Obama Presidential Center. And so the application is just closed. For Leaders USA, we have 100 spots in this cohort. We had 3,000 applications. And so our job is to figure out what to do with 2,900 promising leaders who we want to make sure are part of the work while we bring these US-based leaders through our program. So more to come on that. I think the thing I want you all to know to get excited about is the epicenter in this is going to be your town.
Yeah.
Once we build the Obama Center, these leaders are going to be coming here. And I'll tell you a story that my colleague David Seamus told me, which is that he was talking to one of the leaders who we're meeting with overseas, who's incredibly excited about the summit that we were doing. He said, because they couldn't wait to come to Chicago because, quote, that's where hope is. Right?
Yes.
Thank you. That's not the image that I think we mostly see right now when we hear our friends and family who are outside the city talking about Chicago. And I want you all to know that and embrace it. Because it isn't, I don't want to be another one of these situations where yes, we can turns into yes, you can. And it's on us to try to tell that story. This has to be an opportunity that is embraced by our city. I want you all to help own this and bring it to life, because if it's only the job of the people who get paid at the Obama Foundation to celebrate what's happening in the city of Chicago, we're not going to be able to get it done.
Yes. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Are you fired up?
Let's go.
Ready to go? Tell you, I got all the Obama stuff right on my fingertips.
Speaking of all the Obama stuff, I'm also very impressed by your commitments to a diverse talent pipeline in the construction of the Obama building. And you were very gracious and you accepted my invitation to testify before the Cook County Commission on Social Innovation on how you're doing it and how we might take that model and leverage it and scale it throughout the region, where employers of all stripes, not only in the construction trades, can tap into that talent pool. And you're doing a really good job of ensuring that people from the community will get those jobs, but people of all stripes will get those jobs too. And what I'm curious about is how are you going about the job of meeting the broader goals of going beyond your construction sites and really changing the dynamic, educating the employer community that it's in their best interest to seek diversity among their talents, because obviously, the simple answer is it expands the talent pool. But I think there's a more nuanced answer why that's in their best interest. And I'm curious to see how you want to frame the value proposition for employers within our region.
Well, I think I'd start by saying that the reason why we set a goal for our construction so far, we have not set our goals yet for the operations. The reason why we set our goals around the construction workforce to increase the talent pool is through the listening that we did before we got started. We learned that was the barrier. That what was happening in the city was that a very limited number of tradespeople from the south and west sides of Chicago were basically being shuttled across the city with different projects. And no one was actually taking the time to meaningfully expand the talent pool, except some good folks at the Chicago Community Trust who were working with others, creating something that turned into Hire 360.
Right.
With tremendous effort being done by hardworking people doing workforce development work painstakingly all across the city. And so we realized that we didn't have to start ourselves to create something new, right? What we could do is we could bring together this Hire 360, the Chicago Women in Trades, Revolution Workshop on the West Side, a fantastic pre-apprenticeship program Elder Ford had put together, and that we could bring them together and set that as a goal. And so we have thousands of applications who've gone through that initiative. It's called We Can Vote. Right now, some 95% of the people who've gone through that are not working at the Presidential Center. They're working on other projects across the city. And what I also heard was that when people had workforce goals for their community and their neighborhood, they were basically pulling people off the community into the construction side. They would give them jobs, particularly if they were getting pressure from the alderman or what have you. You have a job.
Right.
But the way the construction industry works, you have a temp job, right? Because once that thing is over, once whatever it is you're doing is over, and you're not a part of the industry, you're not going to get hired for the next job. And so what we had was a bunch of pissed off people who thought they were coming in for a career and instead had been given a temp job. And not a great one at that. And why would you invest in someone to have them learn the skills to be an iron worker, for example, if you know they're not going to be a part of the system, right? You just give them like something to do so that when the activist or the alder person comes into the construction site, oh, we got a bunch of black people here, we're good, right? But that you don't change anything. And so the opportunity was let's do something, build within the system that's been created in Chicago and try to embed diversity and increasing the talent pool pipeline of people who are ready for these jobs. So part of my value proposition is, one, you're actually going to be doing legitimate workforce development and not the usual game playing lip service political crap that happens in the city. That's value proposition one. That usually wakes a business person up. They're like, whoa, oh, wait a minute. I'm not having to do some, wallpaper. I'm actually can have the opportunity to do something legitimate. Second thing is, and this just started for us a year and a half ago. We already have so many amazing stories of women who are, this is why I use the ironworker example, who are able to drive within a great paying, frankly, union job, and are able to someday tell their kids when they go by the Obama Presidential Center, I built that.
Right.
There's nothing better if you want some good
Right.
PR
Right.
than that. And then the last thing I'd say is that, and this goes back to the corporate social responsibility question. We're in a very volatile time. And, I don't know, I don't care what kind of enterprise, something is likely going to go wrong. You're going to make a mistake. If you live long enough, you'll make a couple. What I think has served us well, and what I hope serves us well is we continue our work with the Obama Foundation and things shift and we, God forbid, make mistakes. We're going to have people inside the community who are going to have our back.
Yes.
Right? They're going to say, you know what? They're only human. They're not perfect. But they invested in us.
Yes.
Or, they didn't do this right. They did this wrong. But you know what? They were honest. They listened to me. When they said they were going to do something, they didn't. When I asked them to make a promise that they said they couldn't keep, they heard me out and they were honest about it. And I think it's that kind of relationship and trust building. I'll tell you one more thing because I'm now thinking about something that my wife shared with us, which is this talk that was given by an author, in which he had a chart. And on the chart, it was two vectors. One vector was performance and the other vector was trust. And that people, are looking always for a high performer. And I think this happens in workforce, but I think this happens in life, where if you have somebody who is a high performer but low trust, they end up being toxic. And if you have someone even at medium trust or high medium performance or even moderate performance, but high trust, they end up being valuable. And what he said was that this is how people, the Navy SEALs, the highest performing organization on the planet, chooses its participants, chooses its leaders, is a higher level of trust. Trust is more important than how you would measure performance. And I think it's because trust, as I always say, change moves at the speed of trust.
Yes.
Right? And I think building in trust, painstakingly, authentically, saying you made a mistake when you make a mistake, listening and building meaningful relationships, being there early and sticking around when the hard stuff happens. That's how you survive the volatility of the world that we live in today. At least those are the lessons that
Wow, thank you. I'm also interested, yes. I'm also, in as much as the whole social enterprise community seeks to harness the power of the marketplace to drive positive social change. I'm curious to learn how the foundation goes about the business of attacking concentrated poverty by elevating its supply chain to a value chain. To what extent are you going to leverage your buying power to source goods and services from enterprising nonprofits, social purpose businesses, worker-owned cooperatives? How do you see your role in lifting up those enterprises, presuming that the quality of their goods and services is no less than that otherwise available in the commercial marketplace, and recognizing that as kind of part of your mission as you lift up communities, lift up people, lift up families?
Well, a couple of things. I'd say, one, stay tuned, because we're just building those plans. Two, my belief is when people come to the Obama Center, they're gonna want to come to a place that looks and feels like the community that it's in. So it's part of our mission and our success strategy to make sure that we have not just parts of the building named, for example, after Adia Pendleton, the girl who was tragically killed right in the neighborhood, just a few blocks away from the center, but that we have materials and art. That's why there's a Chicago branch of the Chicago Public Library that's a part of the center. We're gonna wanna make sure that there's some authenticity to the experience. But then, the last thing I'd say about how we think about our buying power is I'll talk to you about how we chose the contractors who have the opportunity and privilege to build the center. Because that actually has ended up being, and probably will be, our largest single contract.
Right.
So as you can imagine, this is a very complicated project. It's a very expensive project. And so whoever is going to be the contractor, this is what my wife does for a living, so you correct me if my language is wrong. Whoever was going to be the contractor needed to have the bonding ability to manage something that expensive. So a tremendous amount of risk. Now, we also wanted to make sure that we had the kind of diversity that we needed to have, both because of what our beliefs are, who we are, because of we wanted to impact wealth building in the community and in the city that we love, but also because this is the presidential center of the first Black president of the United States, and need to have some flavor.
There's that.
Right? I mean, that's how it is.
Yeah.
So, if those of you don't know what I'm talking about, there's some Black folks in the audience who tell you what flavor.
We'll ask them.
So we went around and we talked to the construction industry leaders in the city, and what we found out was that what started off as a very laudable initiative, started by my political hero, Harold Washington, to create a strong set-aside program in the city, had turned into a permanent ceiling for Black and women-owned construction firms. So what you had was you wanted to do city business, you had to set aside a certain percentage of the business for minority contractors. So what people would do is they take some percentage, like, you're building a building, you got the garage, the parking garage. So you give the parking garage to the Black one, you got your set aside, it's great, it's laudable. but they're completely cut out from the rest of the project. And so they're never able to compete for a prime business, prime opportunity where they could be the lead and someone else could be the set aside. Because they couldn't show that they were there from, kind of soup to nuts and had engaged in the entire process, which is something you have to prove if you want to get a prime contract. But they also, because of that set-aside program, were not able to grow up to scale.
Right.
When you think about it, there's been set-asides in this city since Harold Washington was mayor. And the amount of money that has flowed through city coffers into construction in the minority homes. Why aren't there any huge national Black minority-owned firms coming out of the city of Chicago?
Yeah.
Because they can't scale.
Contract bundling.
They never have the opportunity to develop a scale to be able to drive that. Now, there's some in other cities, there's huge ones in Columbus, Washington, DC. So you can, if people wanted to make a change, there are other places to take a look for that change. And so we basically use the power of the marketplace, which we learned this. We kind of embedded some incentives into our RFP. And as the marketplace looked at the RFP, they realized that they were going to have a certain level of participation that was much different than the current level of participation is business as usual. So interestingly enough, without our involvement or frankly knowledge, the 4 largest Black construction firms in the city that usually compete like tooth and nail against each other. Because as you can imagine, the set aside stuff, these other projects, they're fierce competitors, decided that they would form a JV.
Yeah.
And they went out and interviewed the national firms that have the bonding capacity to be able to take on the risk of a project of our size and say to them, you are not going to get this project unless you work with one of us. And you're not dividing us because we're a JV, you gotta work with all 4 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And they cut a deal actually with the firm, I'll give them credit, Turner Construction, ended up giving them basically 51% of the risk. Turner took on 51% of the risk and 49% of the risk.
Mm-hmm.
And because they had the ultimate
8
risk,
o'clock, I want to watch my show. Is that okay?
they were able to leverage the bond.
It's at 7 something.
Other firms as primes. Now, I can tell you that has made our project super complicated.
Oh,
It is hard to take 4 or 5 firms that have never worked together before
it's fine.
and have them work together.
I'll put it on the pad.
But it's been worth it. 1, so I can tell this story.
So the dude I'm listening to is
Please.
2,
a senior VP with the
so that
Obama
these
Foundation,
firms can now,
and
you
he's
can
being
see
interviewed by my friend Marc.
I'm gonna
And,
forget some, so I
it's
won't
very
name
interesting.
all the sons and
Why did your friend John?
are now able to do, they're involved in all kinds
Tom
of
Schneider, Tom.
across.
Sent you $1.
3,
$1.
I texted you about this. Why didn't you ever read your texts?
What are you talking about?
I
but
asked you,
before,
did you get
everything
$1?
else
Can
we
you
wanted to do
confirm?
around
And you never responded.
workforce
I
development.
never saw that.
We've got a
Well,
bunch of
you
really
got it.
partners
Yeah.
at the table. I don't have to
So
fight with my
he was
construction
testing
firm
the
about who
Zelle
they're hiring.
before he sends
They're
you the
fighting with me, telling me about what they
$175.
want to do that's transformative. They're bringing in high school kids from
Oh,
across
I will
the
let him
street,
know.
teaching them how
You
to,
got it. You
get
can
jobs
send the
doing
rest.
plumbing. They're doing celebrations. We're gonna have a women empowerment conference at lunchtime. The next time they're in, there are a bunch of willing partners in order to cascade that impact all the way down.
Oh, I didn't see that one. All I saw was the part
So
about.
that's the power of supply chain.
Okay.
That's a really good
about
answer.
Was
Thank
I
you.
getting? Zoom?
Oh,
Well,
one other form of leverage I
there were
want to
other
mention
texts
is
there you clearly
the
did
way in
not
which the
read.
foundation is working
Fine.
with vibrant community on the south side, but other communities as well. And for example, I know you're the chairman of the Emerald South Economic Development Collaborative, which attracts and coordinates investment through partnerships, encourages local business startups, generates community wealth. How does contributing to initiatives like that further the foundation's mission?
But I think it goes back to understanding what your role is. When we got started, we took a look around at other buildings, developments in urban communities and tried to see which ones had the kind of positive net impact that we wanted to have in the south side of Chicago. We looked at Philly, Baltimore, Spain, Oakland, New York, And what we found was that it was important to have a community-based organization that was almost explicitly and exclusively focused on economic development. What happens often is community-based organizations are struggling to deal with all kinds of things, right? Community development, education, violence, small business corridors, on and on and on. And then we're put in a position to take on economic development on top of it. The other thing that happened in Chicago is, and I love our neighborhoods. We have 77 neighborhoods. I love our neighborhoods. But I'd be in these conversations about like Washington Park and Woodlawn as they were different. And like, I could look outside the window in Washington Park and see Woodlawn. I'm like, why are we not having a broader, more regional dialogue? And so, Emerald South is really designed to focus completely on how to drive the economic opportunity that will be coming with our project. Frankly, our project, as much money as we spend, we are dwarfed by the dollars that are spent by the University of Chicago.
Yes.
Already in these, that have already spent and will continue to spend. So there's already an economic driver in the neighborhood. And our hope is that there will be more. Emerald South is designed to think about how do homeowners and residents win and get some of the upside as the community develops. How do we make sure that people who want to locate businesses and large employers in the area have the opportunity to successfully make that happen and engage the workforce that's there? How do we take the opportunities that are there through technology, and the fact that we have Argonne and IIT and the University of Chicago and what will be the most technologically advanced presidential library, we think, in the country right there. How do we make sure that that community is at the forefront of the technology revolution? And so I think that, we hope, and we also know that it's going to be really hard to train the next generation of leaders and build, $1 billion investment in the South Side of Chicago. No one's done that before. That's a lot. So we need to focus on taking on doing that, because that's something probably no one else could do. We can't also decide that it is our job to transform the South Side of Chicago through economic development. We have to have the humility to be able to want a partner in place who can work with us. We have a role to play.
Got it.
But we can't take that on completely ourselves. And so that's why Emerald South and the work that organization and so many others in that community. I was just speaking at one called Blacks and Green. There's just so many others in that community that we want to work with as well.
Yeah, I know them well. Finally, let's broaden the lens. And you're the perfect person to ask this question.
Oh boy, okay.
So we have low profit limited liability companies. We have benefit corporations. We have enterprising nonprofits. We have others that are developing a growing community of interest around the powerful idea of driving positive social change through business strategies. But all of that depends on collaboration. You have socially conscious entrepreneurs, you have investors, philanthropists, government, foundation, traditional businesses, financial institutions. And I want to ask you about collaboration. While we as a society face housing insecurity, food insecurity, racial, wealth and income gap, disparities in access to good health, so many other social problems, what in your judgment is the best way to align the interests of all of the necessary or desirable stakeholders to give mission-driven ventures everything they need to flourish?
So, all right, I'm going to give you the super honest answer.
That's the only kind of expect of you.
As opposed to everything else. I don't know, I wouldn't think every time. I'm going to be honest. I say that before. But I say that because I want you to hear And I want to give myself the opportunity to really try to drive this home, because I believe it. I think if you believe in collaboration in the human spirit, you have to accept that human beings are self-interested and often unempathic. And I often think that in these mission-driven organizations, we don't want to kind of acknowledge that. But community organizing and collective action is built on a recognition that people have their own interests that they come into play. I will tell you that the thing, someone asked me once, you worked in the White House, you worked in Congress, you worked on the Hill, you worked in the private sector, you've been, what did you learn? And what I learned is that everybody thinks everyone else is an idiot. And that if only those people would do what I want them to do, everything would be great. That's what people said in Congress about the White House. That's what people in the White House said. When I was at the agency, that's what people in the agency would say about this. And I think that there's a lesson in that I really try to embrace, which is that you have to bring people and align people around their own interests. And most people's interests actually are not as cynical as I think our national conversation would have. I found that most people actually think they're doing what's good, and they're doing what's right, and they're doing what's necessary. And so if you can bring people into a space of collaboration, accepting that they are there to do what they think is right, and find the opportunity through painstaking dialogue to what the commonplace, the place where collective action can move the needle. I don't want you to set aside all the other 100 things that are important. But if we can find one thing that we can do together, and we're anybody who's been involved in any kind of team activity, like, I don't know, preparing for Thanksgiving, or, we don't have to go to sports. Like, we do a lot of team activities. You got a bunch of people, I don't know how your family is. Our family is very harmonious. But you may have some people in your family who you don't really like. But have you noticed that moment where you actually have come together and you accomplished something that's meaningful to the people in the family, right? It happens every time you go to a high school graduation. All of a sudden you see people who don't like each other, cheering, crying, celebrating because of the commonality of that. And we gave this child has graduated from high school, gave him the opportunity. That, I think, is how these organizations and how our organizations work, because they're all made up of individuals who are humans. When you are sitting and doing that collaboration, it isn't, LLC that's at the table. It's Judith.
That's
who's
right.
The CEO of the LLC.
That's exactly right.
And she's there. She's got payroll to make. She's got stakeholders and a board to manage. Like, her husband did something stupid that morning. She's got a lot going on. She's trying to figure out what she can do to move the needle on what she cares about. And if you can get everybody to choose one thing and discover that one thing together, and then actually start to move the needle, that's how you build common ground. That's how you create success. That's how you create transformation. And that's how you give people the excitement to say, you know what? I don't care what else I have to do. Next month, I'm going to that. Because that's working. Because we're getting something done. And you know what? I used to think that dude was an idiot. He might still be, but you know what? He agrees with me on this. We went in there and got that done. And that is, you can't accomplish that through command and control. You can't accomplish that through going in and trying to own the table and dictate what happens. You can only accomplish that. I know I'm gonna sound, like the Obama guy, but you can only accomplish that by recognizing that that's where change comes from. It comes from ordinary people deciding to do extraordinary things. I get it. I know it's in the books. I know that's what he said, but I just say I would like the president twice and nobody thought he could. So, you know, we got something on.
Well, thank you for that upbeat conclusion. And thank you for being here,
Thank you.
my friend. Thank you, Trey. Thank you. You're the best.
Alrighty, everyone, we have one thing to ask of you tonight. So we're gonna come around and pass out a survey. We'd love to know what you thought of tonight's presentation, what you'd like to see next time. Our will be open as well, it's not going anywhere. And if you'd like to get involved in Social Enterprise Chicago, or the board members raise their hand here, come talk to one of us that are on the board. Whether it's on the board, volunteering, helping us fundraise. So, thank you.